All right, good evening everyone and welcome to Brookline Booksmith's author event series. Today welcoming Gareth Higgins to discuss his book, How Not to Be Afraid. My name is Alex Schaffner and I'm the events director here at the store. On behalf of all of us who work here, I would like to say thank you so much for spending your evening with us, for supporting an independent bookstore, as well as a remarkable writer and thinker, and for helping us continue our legacy. We've been here since 1961, and if you're familiar with the store, you may have noticed that in the last couple of years, and again in the last couple of months, we have grown greatly. That is because of community members like you who have decided that we are important to you. So thank you for being here, and thank you for keeping us healthy and vibrant. Tonight I have the privilege of introducing author Gareth Higgins to our stage. Gareth, raised and schooled in Belfast during the time of the Troubles, has made peace and justice his raison d'etre. He has received a doctorate in sociology from Queen's University Belfast, and he taught a groundbreaking graduate course on reconciliation studies at Trinity College, Dublin. His work includes everything from peace building and violence reduction to the creation of festivals celebrating story and its power in many forms. His work is driven by spirituality, curiosity, and a determined pursuit of a better world. In How Not to Be Afraid, Gareth explores what it is to navigate fear and to flourish in defiance of that fear. He walks us through 7 of the most basic and common fears experienced by us as human beings, and with grace and steadfastness shows us how we can move beyond shutting down, freezing up, and forgetting how to act. He shows us ways to be open instead of closed. He speaks empathetically, offering a path to nurture the peace and strength within ourselves. It's a complete pleasure to read this book, and it is a complete pleasure to have Gareth here to discuss it with us tonight. So thank you again for joining us, and please join me in welcoming Gareth Higgins.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Ronnie, for connecting me with Lisa, who invited me to be here, and thank you all of you for coming out on a cold Wednesday night to have a little bit of conversation about something that I imagine we've all had some experience of. In fact, I know that to be true because fear is a totally naturally occurring thing in the world that actually helps us, keeps us safe, protects us when it's necessary and in right proportion. The problem is when it's out of proportion or when it's not necessary, it can at best distract us, and at worst it can cause us to harm ourselves or harm other people. Before I read a little bit and then share some thoughts from the book, I want to say the book is not called How to Stop Feeling Fear. For one thing, as I just said, if we stop feeling fear, that would be dangerous. If we didn't feel fear or have some experience of wise fear, we wouldn't put our seatbelts on. We wouldn't avoid the edge of cliff tops. Some of you may have had the experience of having an anesthetic. I just had someone inject my eyelid a few weeks ago, and was kind of stunned by how good needles are these days and how easy the experience was. Had a little bit of surgery, but my eyelid kind of went a bit floppy, and you may have had the experience where part of your body was put to sleep by anesthetic, and then you burned, say you burned your hand, it got too close to a flame, but you didn't feel it. And so it was only after the anesthetic wore off that you were in pain. That would be what would happen to us if we never felt fear. We would burn our hands unnecessarily. Now, most of us don't have that problem. I did have a therapist once who was in his mid-80s by the time we were working together, and he said to me, I don't know why, but it does not occur to me to feel fear. Those were the words, it does not occur to me. And he wasn't being cavalier and stupid with his actions, so I wasn't about to judge him. He also was understanding that he's pretty rare. Most of us are feeling some fear about something most of the time. There's an ancient Middle Eastern teaching that says the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And I was raised in a tradition that seemed to portray God as this terrifying monster in the sky who would kill you if you didn't love him enough. It's a pretty messed up vision of reality. I think that may be a misinterpretation of what the poetry of that teaching is intended to mean. Instead of the terror of this monster in the sky is the beginning of wisdom, I simply think it may mean respect for reality is the beginning of wisdom. If I walk out in the middle of the interstate, I am not respecting reality. Unless I'm troubled and disturbed and I want to be hurt, you know? If I put my hand in a fireplace, I'm not respecting reality. Fear emerged and has evolved in response to actual threats. The ones that are usually mentioned are being chased by saber-toothed tigers. This has not happened to anybody for a long time, but apparently it happened to our forebears. And our brains evolved these little almond-shaped devices called the amygdalae, which are really the fear receptors. Now, I'm not scientifically trained or neurologically trained. My knowledge of psychology comes 99% from being the subject of a psychologist or a therapist or the client of a healer in that way. But my understanding is the reason, or one of the large reasons why we feel so much fear today is because our brains have not evolved quickly enough to adjust for the bombardment of information that comes at us, particularly through electronic media, and most especially the devices we carry in our pockets, through which we have access to all written down human knowledge that has ever been published, which is clearly a miracle, and connection with a wider and more diverse group of people than any group of people previously connected with, no matter who they are or where they are on the privilege tree. Most people know someone more different to them than any humans in previous history ever would have known. This is a miracle too. And then there's all the other conveniences that electronic media delivers to us. Perhaps the most morally substantial one is that privileged people cannot ignore the suffering of marginalized people as easily as we, and I'm going to say we, assuming that if we're in a bookstore on a Wednesday night, if we have the time and the resources to be here, we're probably privileged people. We cannot ignore the suffering of marginalized people as much or as easily as we used to be able to. And bonus good news, even the most privileged among us are being invited to discuss our own vulnerability. Because even the most powerful people in the world have pain and vulnerabilities and suffering, and perhaps those who misuse their power the most or in the most egregious ways, well, maybe that has some connection with not having had their vulnerability tended to in a meaningful way. I don't want to give anybody a pass or make excuses, but I think we can all agree that everybody has some power and everybody has some lack. The question is, what do you do with the power, and who do you find to help you with the lack? The stories that are bombarding us cause us to fear more than we need to. That everything is on the verge of collapse, and that everything matters as much as everything else. Regarding the last 24 hours in the exercise of democracy in this country, I want to say that it's probably true that everything is political, but politics isn't everything. And all I mean by that is that everything has to do with power and resources, and how those of us who hold power learn to use it sensitively and with respect for the common good. The fears we have been accelerated by the way electronic media tells us that everything happening right now is the most important thing that's ever happened in human history, and if we don't fix it today, everything is going to be over tomorrow. The flashing red stripe on the bottom of the screen, the first time I saw breaking news, it scared me. It was supposed to scare me. It is supposed to scare you and keep you watching. Now, I don't scapegoat the electronic media as if it's a they. It's not a they. I used to work for the BBC, and I have a Facebook page, which means I am part of the media. And if you are on any form of social media, you are part of the media too. Amazing challenge to take seriously about the stories you're putting out into the world and what you amplify. About 10 years ago, a friend of mine posted on Facebook something awful, something terribly homophobic that had happened somewhere. And this is a gay man, and I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. And I remember reading it and going, it just scared me when I read it. It just triggered my fears. But there was no path to me doing anything meaningful in response to this event, or anything helpful. All it did was it made my day worse. It triggered my trauma. It left me feeling disempowered. And so as a response to that, I began thinking, before I even knew the word algorithm, wouldn't it be and when I was utterly naive about the intentions of how these things work. Actually, I'm gonna walk that back. When I was utterly naive about the way the systems cause us to regress to the meanest way of thinking about things, no matter what the intentions of the individuals involved in the system. There are very good people in most institutions. But the thought I had back then, before I even knew the word algorithm, was, wouldn't it be great if Facebook built in into their programming that every 5th post on Facebook would be a meme discerned by a think tank made up of the 100 wisest people on the planet. I was thinking about people like Desmond Tutu and Wang Rao Matai. I was thinking about how Richard Branson and Peter Gabriel had helped convene this group called the Elders. They still exist. Nelson Mandela was part of it before he died. And their job is to be the elders of the planet. Wouldn't it be great if somebody with the resources of Facebook would convene the 100 wisest people in the world and research what would be the most truthful and helpful memes that we could post every 5th post on Facebook, and build into your programming that the scroll would actually deliberately slow down when you got to the 4th, that it would be going into slow mode. You literally could not scroll past the 5th post without it being there long enough that you would have to see it. And it might say things like, this is an organization, say there was a terrorist attack, and most of us weren't there when it happened. Most of us aren't directly affected by it. We just feel fear and anger. Well, here's the things you can do if you're distant from that. You know, I often thought, growing up in Northern Ireland, we would dwell on the spectacular bad. And we're very, very good at saying nothing's ever changed here. We're very, very good at looking at the horrible thing that happened today and not looking at the longer term picture. Always looking for the person who has the worst opinion because they'll sound the sexiest, or the car crashiest on the TV. Nuance, thought, exploration. When was the last time you heard someone on a TV news program say, to be honest, I don't think I know the answer to that question? But when I think about it, these are the other questions that come to my mind. When was the last time you heard, as a mainstream ordinary activity, a person of influence sharing a alleged discussion between two politically opposed people and asking them, what's the best thing you can say about this other person? And then, when was the last time I did that with the people I don't like? Because it has to start with me too. So if there's a thesis in this book, it's not, this is about how to stop feeling fear. It's about how to take fear seriously enough to get clear about which of our fears are right-sized and what to do in response to those, and which may not be, because we're being bombarded by a story that depends on keeping us afraid. And then asking ourselves, is it true? And if it's not true, what would a more true version of this story be? And then, is it being told in the most helpful way? And if it's not, what would a more helpful way be? It isn't rocket science. And even rocket science isn't rocket science to a rocket scientist. And you are all rocket scientists in the realm of story, because human beings were made for story. You've been telling stories, hearing stories, and if you're like me, unconsciously believing stories without questioning them all of your life, until there was an intervention. Maybe there was an intervention in the form of a fictional character who you fell in love with when you were 8 years old, and they started asking you questions and encouraging you to ask questions. Or maybe you had an actual literal mentor, or maybe being here, maybe you come to events in this very room as part of your questioning the story. And if you're wise, you'll know you'll never get to a completely true version of the story or the most helpful version. And that's great, because it means you get to keep on growing for the rest of your life. And keep on changing and evolving and healing. And maybe best of all, if you become the kind of person who regularly practices the time-worn path that helps us get clarity about our fears, you won't stop feeling afraid. I'm sorry, I had a sad look from your face. You probably will feel less afraid. You might be more tender with yourself. You might enjoy your life more. You might learn that the thing that should be feared the most is the unlived life. The thing that should be feared the most is not living the life you could live because you're afraid of what might happen if you take that step, or you knock on that door, because you might get embarrassed, or you might fail, or somebody might blame you for something. And best of all, you mirror to other people who need your better story possibilities that they need to know exist. Most of the significant moments of change in my life occurred when I saw somebody else do it first, and I thought, I could maybe do that too. Or, slightly more shadowy, who do they think they are? I was supposed to do that first. And then I can do it my version. It's not intended to be a panacea, and I don't want to sugarcoat things. I know that people are dealing with horrendous burdens. I know that there probably are people in this room who right now are going through some of the worst and hardest things you've ever gone through. So I can't speak to you directly about your fear from this lectern, but I am happy to chat with you afterwards. And one of the things I would say to you is I've been in my own version of horrendous, hellish, thought I was going to die, thought it might be better if I just actually did die. And when I look back on moments like that, I wouldn't say I have no regrets, although I understand why, particularly in the 12-step movement, people say regret for the past is a waste of spirit. I don't dwell on the regret most of the time, because I'm aware all the good things in my life today are also an accumulation of the most painful things and the doors I went through as a result of those things. So I wouldn't say I don't feel regret, but I often can say, well, it didn't kill me. You know, this thing that I feared wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. In fact, most of the things that we are afraid of aren't going to happen. And when they do happen, the experience is not as bad as the pathological fear that we have about it. And when the most fearful things happen, Mr. Rogers is right to say, look for the helpers. What I think he means is that when terrible things happen to human beings, the terrible thing is never the whole story. Because the terrible thing, when it is witnessed by somebody else, always calls forth love and courage. So the person that it's happening to might be in hell. The other people around them are leaping to their defense or protection, even if it's just one. Even if it's just one. Even if you're just seeing it on TV and you're thinking it, that you want to help. You may not be able to help that person, but you can help the next person you see. The Irish shaman and poet John Moriarty once came home to his house on the coast on a night illuminated by one of those diamond white full moons. no artificial light around his house. And when he got home and switched the lights off in his car, all he could see was the moon and what it was illuminating. And what it illuminated in front of his house was the ocean. This wonderful line, which I believe is called a moonscape. This line across the ocean. It was astonishing. When he went into his house, he switched on the light in his living room, and the moon that up until that point was shining through the window disappeared. So he switched the light off again, and the moon came back. So then he thought he'd experiment and switched the light on one more time, and the moon disappeared again, and this time he thought, oh, okay, I see what's happening. So he switched the light off one more time and sat in his armchair looking out the window at the ocean, I believe for several hours until the wee hours of the morning. And when he tells this story in one of his books, he uses it to illustrate the point that there are some things you can only see in the dark. Rebecca Solnit has an amazing book called Hope in the Dark. And she derives that idea from a letter that Virginia Woolf wrote in 1915, just after the start of what may have already come to be known as the Great War and eventually became known as the First World War. And in this letter, Virginia Woolf says, the future is dark. But she doesn't mean that the future is bad. She just means, I can't see the future. Now, this is true. Unless you have a crystal ball, none of us can see the future. And if we switched all the lights off in this room, I think it would be pretty dark. But we could feel our way around if we didn't, and if we'd been just dropped into this room blindfolded and didn't know what it was, pretty soon we would realize, oh, it's books. It's books, and there's columns, and wow, there's other people here too. Our programming would lead us to believe it was an unsafe place just because it was dark. That it was a dangerous place just because it was dark. We spend 8 hours of every day, a third of our life, in the dark. And some of us are plagued with obsessive or traumatized nightmares. But most of us sleep reasonably well, most nights. We go into the dark every night and we experience unconsciousness in an unconscious way. One of my teachers, a person who I only say his name if you talk to me one-to-one afterwards, because his writing is so dangerous, I don't want to take responsibility for saying his name publicly. But his last name is Kingsley and his first name is Peter, but don't put those two names together. And when I say, and he's I've never met him, and I'm immersed in his books, and I'm scared to meet him because they are so mind-shatteringly challenging. Anyone read any Peter Kingsley? This is my point exactly. Seriously, it'll wreck you for about 6 months, and then you may bounce back. He talks about primordial meditation, which was the original form of meditation that you could teach, I think in ancient Greece, where there was a network of caves where if you had trouble in your life or you were ill, you could go to these caves and do primordial meditation. And primordial meditation is really easy. You just lie down. That's all it is. You lie down, you close your eyes. You would be tended to by priests. It was a little bit like going to a very evolved spa. You lie down, you close your eyes, and then with your mind, you let your body sink into the earth. That's it. And things happen. Don't try it while you're driving. Kingsley's point, or one of his points, is each of us has the opportunity to do this every single night. A third of our lives are spent sleeping. And if we were to, because it's going to sound counterintuitive, if we were to consciously let ourselves go unconscious, if in the last 3 or 4 minutes before you go to sleep, instead of doing what I do, which is usually I'm reading until my eyes close, what if I stopped 3 or 4 minutes before my eyes closed, switched the light off, just lay there and breathe slowly and let my mind, let my body sink into the earth? What if I did that, never mind every night of my life, what if I did it just one night? I have done it on the odd night, and things happen. Things that are to do with putting myself together again. Things that are to do with putting me in touch with what's more real than the superficial bombardment of what hits me on the street. I think we live in dark times in the Virginia Woolf sense. All I mean by that is that we can't see the future. I think a lot of us have had the rug pulled out from under us in the last few years, and a false sense of certainty about the future has disappeared. And it's been traumatic. Now, there's at least 3 levels on which I think it's also good. The first is, if it's true that our sense of certainty about the future was a lie, it would be good to face the truth. It's always good to face the truth. We can face it in more or less gentle ways. That's the first thing. The second thing is, it seems to me that maybe most people on the planet didn't have this false sense of certainty about the future to start with. This was something that belonged to a certain social demographic. And so it might bring us closer together as a human race. And the third thing is, once you grieve the lost imaginary future, once you grieve it, what's on the other side of that might be even better. There's a moment in Wonder Woman 1984, which is a much better film than its reputation, where Diana, Wonder Woman, says goodbye to the man she loves. They are choosing to part, knowing that the fantasy they have of a happy life together is preventing her from fulfilling her vocation as someone whose job is to save people. And it's a very difficult sacrificial choice that the two of them make. And the film does it, it compresses it time-wise for obvious reasons. This would probably take months or years in a person's life. But in the next instant after they part, and she's starting to cry, to grieve this, but knowing she's making the right choice and he's making the right choice, suddenly she hears his voice in her head. He was a pilot in that First World War who has explained the laws of aerodynamics to her earlier in the movie. I think he says, he takes her up in a plane and he says something like, it's okay, you're just dancing with the air. It's something like that. It's something nicely poetic like that. She hears his voice in her head and she suddenly realizes she can fly too. And to me, cinema is my great artistic passion as a reader or watcher. This is the most profound illustration of what the healing of grief can look like. You know, when you've lost someone dear to you, and if you're in a very immediate grief right now, my heart goes out to you. But someone dear to you who's died in the past, it starts by feeling you can't possibly live without them, and you rend your garments. There's a reason we have that phrase. You weep, you rage, you beg and plead and hope that they come back. And then if you go on a healing journey, eventually their voice becomes part of your interior monologue. When you remember them, you ask, what would they do in this situation? They are still alive inside you. I wonder what would happen if people who are realizing that our false sense of certainty about the future was always a lie, if we could grieve it and get through the rage and the rending of the garments, and then stop fighting reality and wonder, just as the only way to go somewhere new is to allow yourself to be lost, what would it be like if we could reinvent our lives, our culture, our assumptions, the human race, what anything is for and how anything matters? Because if we're now in a situation where none of us can really have the same kind of certainty that our forebears had about how long they were going to live. You know, we don't know if the climate emergency is going to uncontrollably take over. None of us can predict the lifespan of anybody in this room. Some people in this room could literally live to be 150 years old. There's a realistic scientific possibility. And something could happen to me or any one of us tonight. Now, I'm smiling, but I'm not mocking it. I'm smiling the smile of recognition that the things I used to think mattered don't matter to me as much as they used to, because fear was killing me at the same time as me being certain I knew what my future was going to be. Now fear has less of a hold because I think I'm sort of starting to accept I'm going to die of something. So I'd rather live now and transform the fear of the unlived life into asking myself, as Buddy Wakefield says, what would it be like to live for a living? Right? And that's not selfish. It's not about amassing things for yourself. That's about sharing. It's about living vibrantly. It's more like Willy Wonka than it is Citizen Kane. I'd like to read a couple of short passages from the book, say one more thing, and then let's have a little conversation. You all have lovely faces, and you're either listening very well or doing a brilliant job of making it look like you're listening really well, and I like either of those. Here's a blessing for seeing in the dark. That's an echo of that story from John Moriarty, that there's some things you can only see when you can't see. No one can know your darkness like you can, and even you will not know it unless you face it. Strange, I know, to imagine facing something you cannot see. But there are things that can only be found in the dark. There is light that can only be seen in the dark. There may even be fragments or dimensions of love that will only touch you if you let them visit you in the dark. You are here not just to save the world, but to be changed. So, may nighttime bring you in touch with memory, an examine of the day, with gratitude and learning, of the year, of your life, and the 7 generations that brought you here. And with possibility of the year, of your life and the 7 generations to come. May you wake from your dreams laughing and carry innocence becoming wonder wherever you go. May you tread lightly on the earth. Know that she belongs to you, and in her is your belonging too. I tell a story in the book, which I'll just paraphrase now, about Archbishop Tutu of South Africa, who at the height of the anti-apartheid movement, there was an anti-apartheid rally in the Anglican Cathedral in Cape Town where Archbishop Tutu was in charge. And I've had the details of this story verified by someone who heard it from Archbishop Tutu directly. The South African secret police came into the church and lined the walls of the church and started taking notes. And I think they were taking names, and they may even have been taking photographs of the people attending the anti-apartheid rally in an attempt to, at a minimum, intimidate people, if not worse. And Archbishop Tutu got down out of the pulpit and greeted the South African secret police. Hi, great to see you. Thanks for coming. Didn't expect you would show up to an anti-apartheid rally. And then he said, of course, we know you're not here for the same reasons as the rest of us. But you can make a decision tonight that would change your life for the better right now, and you'd never look back. You are all invited to join the anti-apartheid movement. All you need to do, these guys were lining the walls, all you need to do is take one step forward right now. And if you do that, we will welcome you into the pews, and I can guarantee you that nothing that you've done up until now will be counted against you, because we recognize the courage that it would take for you to make that leap, joining us, and we'll protect you. Or you can stay where you are, not move, and in the future, when our victory, which is already assured, is visible for the world to see, in the future, all you will have will be your shame. He didn't attack them violently, he didn't run away from them, and he didn't freeze. He did not fight, flee, or freeze, which are the 3 most common responses to fearful stimulus. But he didn't have those reactions in that moment in a vacuum. He had been trained. and he had trained himself. And yes, there's a role for grace here, and chance and serendipity. I think that Archbishop Tutu and all people like him, the vast majority of whom have names that will never be known publicly, because the vast majority of courageous, world-changing actions happen in a hidden way or in a mundane way. The people who printed the handbills for the bus boycott, we don't know their names. We know Rosa Parks' name. They collaborated with each other. There's always many, 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 many more people than the person who's visible. And often being the person who's visible comes with its own burdens. I think Archbishop Tutu and people like Archbishop Tutu have at least two practices that are available to all of us that I think are necessary for the transformation of fear. If the book had a more accurate title, it might be called How to Be Afraid Well. How to be afraid well depends on these two things. One is to slow down your breathing. And I mean that literally and figuratively. There are literal breathing practices that are very useful, especially for people who live in industrialized societies, that will help our bodies be more in tune with the rest of the ecosystem. The Dalai Lama was once asked, what's the one thing that US Americans could do that would make a positive difference in the world? And the Dalai Lama said, go to bed when it gets dark and wake up when it gets light. I think he would agree. Slow down your breathing as well. We're moving too fast. Slow down your breathing. 10%. The wonderful thing is there's now neuroscience in peer-reviewed journals that attests to the value of this. I'm not talking about forcing your breathing. I'm not talking about doing something that's not naturally in tune with the rhythms of your body. But if you're like me, you're not in tune with the rhythms of your body. You need an intervention and a practice. So one is a breathing practice or a meditation practice, or a reading practice, or a quiet practice, or a walking practice. And the second is to gather in small communities of people who are committed to the journey of emotional, psychological, spiritual, cultural, and political maturity, and tell each other the truth about our needs and our gifts. There's no substitute for this kind of community, and there's some stuff that I think people find helpful in the book about how to form such communities, but there's lots of people writing and talking about this kind of stuff. You don't need to do it this particular way. The way we do it in our circles, and I'm in two of these circles, is we gather with groups of between 3 to 8 people. If it gets much more above 10 people, it's too many people. You can have other friends as well, but gather in these circles and just ask 4 questions. What's life giving to you? Not how you doing, but tell me one thing that's brought you life since we last met. Second question, what's not life-giving to you? Not how you doing. Just tell me something that's been difficult for you, but not with the intention of experiencing the difficulty, just describing it. Maybe taking a half step away from it, saying it's this thing and this is the stone on my shoe, or pushing on my chest. And it may be a vast existential issue, or it could just be somebody cut me off in traffic. The third question, what new story do you feel called to live? There's another ancient Middle Eastern teaching that says, without a vision, the people perish. I think a lot of the problems within our politically polarized society, and certainly the one I grew up in, was that people found it easier to talk about why they don't like the other side, or what it is they oppose about what the other side is doing, even if what the other side is doing is worth opposing, even if it should be opposed. We need to have, our vision of the future, our vision of a preferred future, I think needs to outweigh our articulation of what's wrong by a factor of at least 5 to 1. So we need 5 times as much vision as we need naming the problem. The problem must be named. The vision of the world that we want to live into needs to be named more loudly, and it has to include an invitation even to the people who are causing the problem to be part of this new preferred world, as long as they play by the rules. And there's really only one rule, and that's don't harm anybody. I think Desmond Tutu had a practice of slowing down his breathing, or whatever his meditation and prayer practice was, and of gathering in communities of people committed to the journey of the common good, and asking questions that call forth what's most meaningful about our lives. I've been in 2 such groups for about 8 years now, and I wouldn't live without them. If you fear being alone, it might be an invitation for you to slow down your breathing and meet in a conscious community and imagine what it would be like to really love yourself, to really try to love yourself, because the people who love themselves in the healthiest ways are never alone. In fact, they're the ones that don't have enough time to see all the people who want to hang out with them. If your fear is the fear of having done something that can't be fixed, well, that's actually a partial answer to the fear of being alone, because everybody is afraid that they've done something that can't be fixed. Every single conscious person is afraid of that, and the first step to transform that fear is to admit it. We all feel that too. And there may well be opportunities to make amends. More often than not, there's an opportunity to be mirrored by a wise person who tells you, you're really worrying too much, or you go through Richard Rohr says the path to maturity necessarily goes through the valley of immaturity. So yeah, if you can make up for the mistakes you've made or the pain you've caused in other people's life, great. Most of the time you can't, actually. The invitation is just to live in the light of those mistakes and try to, as Samuel Beckett would say, fail better the next time. If you fear not having enough, be generous with somebody else and watch what happens to your sense of scarcity. If you fear having a meaningless life, slow down your breathing and gather in small communities of people committed to the common good and ask them to tell you what they think your purpose is. Not the first time you meet, but after they know you a little bit, to tell you from their highest selves what's your gift and what do you not know about yourself that's beautiful, and how can we help you step into that vocation. If you fear that you'll be broken forever, that's another one that we all have. Unless we're so arrogant that we're completely out of touch with the inner core. If you fear that you'll be broken forever, there's a beautiful practice called slowing down your breathing and gathering in small communities of people committed to a conscious journey toward the common good. And ask them to help you with a little guided meditation where you imagine the wisest possible version of the person that you admire the most. Maybe it's Adrienne Marie Brown spliced with Mr. Rogers in some kind of genetic splicing machine, sitting on a throne of great wisdom, 50 years in the future, telling you the truth about yourself. The wisest and most benign person you could imagine is a projection of the wisdom and benignity, if the word exists, the kindness that already exists inside you. And if you can imagine being mirrored by that wisdom, you'll discover you're not going to be broken forever. You'll actually discover that the brokenness inside you is the path toward the gift of service that only you can give to the rest of the world for whatever length of time you're here. And 2 more fears. I've just named 5 of the most common. Here are the remaining 2. Fear of the world and fear of death. If you're afraid of the world, it's an invitation to be tender with yourself, because your fear of the world is connected to your sensitivity and your kindness. You know, if you could hide from the pain of the world because it lived money on a wall and security guards, that's a way of numbing your own conscience. It's a way of numbing your own sensitivity. It's actually a way of amputating your possible kindness and your possible gift. This is why the richest people who are the happiest, richest people are the ones who give away the most money. If you're afraid of the world, it's an invitation to be tender with yourself, and an invitation to slow down your breathing and imagine things that stimulate thoughts of gratitude or compassion or love. And as you breathe in, let those thoughts get clear and bright. When I do this, I imagine a drive-in movie theater screen with a mountain behind it. It's Montana in my dream. And as the image that reminds me of gratitude, compassion, or love, which could even be a fictional character, as it gets clearer and brighter on the screen, I breathe it in more strongly. And then after I've really got it, I take one deep breath in and I hold it for a few seconds, and with my eyes closed, then I exhale and I make a sound. And as I exhale, I send that thought to every cell of my body. This was taught to me by a therapist. He learned it from Buddha, who learned it from somebody else. I breathe in that image of gratitude, compassion, or love. I hold my breath, and then I send it with my mind to every cell of my body. It's not a magic trick. It's about bringing my body into alignment with what I'm here for, with what's already true, which is that there is more gratitude, compassion, and love than horror in the world, and the only thing that can transform the horror is the gratitude, compassion, and the love giving rise to courageous acts that honestly may get you killed in the end, but fending off a possibly courageous, self-sacrificing death is not the point. Living now is the point. And then I inhale this image one more time, and when I've really got it, I hold my breath, and this time I send it with my mind to whoever in the world needs it, whoever's coming to my mind in that moment. And maybe I could do that for hours, or maybe I could do it for 1 minute a day. And then often when I'm in groups where we're doing this kind of work together, sitting in a circle, I invite people to take this beautiful little risk of breathing in the image that stimulates gratitude, compassion, or love, and then holding your breath and opening your eyes. And this time, when you breathe it out, send it to this person, send it to this person, send it to this person, send it to whoever you have eye contact with, and take the risk of two human beings just looking at each other for a little bit longer than we usually do. It'd be a lot harder to hurt that person once you've done that. If you're afraid of the world, slow down your breathing and gather in groups committed to the common good and do the work of beloved community. That's it. That's all we're here for. All we're here for is to stand in a river in which love flows around us, and we get tuned into what our needs are. I sort of imagine that we have two buckets. There's a bucket of need and there's a bucket of gift, where there's one bucket that says need on the front and the other one says gift on the front. And the gift part is when I have learned what Bill Plotkin calls my eco-niche, which is my place in the ecosystem, what I am here for. And I see the part of the river that is mine to work with start to flow toward me. I put the gift bucket into the river, I pick up the bucket, and then I throw it over the people that need it. And then when I see the part of the river that speaks to my need, I put that bucket into the river, where I ask the person next to me, say, hey, can you help me with this bucket, because I can't hold it by myself. And that all life is we are being more and more immersed in this river of story that's a story that promotes connection and not separation, courage and not fear, creativity and not deadness. Community and the common good. We get to do this throughout our lives. A bucket of need and a bucket of gift. And only by slowing down our breathing and connecting in small groups committed to this conscious journey will we ever find out what our buckets are. Lastly, the fear of death. This is the best one. It's also the easiest fear to deal with. Now, it takes about 85 to 110 years for that easy dealing to complete itself. But the reason the fear of death is the easiest fear to deal with is I'm pretty persuaded that we've all already died once before. John O'Donoghue taught me the notion that there was a time when you were completely secure. In fact, you didn't even know of the concept of insecurity. You were totally safe. You were warm and comfortable. You were living in a cave, surrounded by a warm liquid. You did not know that it was called amniotic fluid. but you weren't bothered with things like that at the time. And this was all you knew. You had no sense of time, actually. I think this is a great illustration. You know when the really, really wise people say live in the moment? I think one of the reasons they say that is that if you live in the moment, there's no past or future, so there's nothing to regret and nothing to fearfully anticipate. And there was a time when that was your story, mine too. And then one day, which was the first day you became aware of the concept that there were things called days, all the water just flooded out of the cave. And you were suddenly thrust down a tunnel. You didn't even know tunnels existed. And the tunnel got narrower as it got longer, and you started to suffocate, and you didn't even know that suffocation was possible. Some of you, it was even more dramatic. The roof of the cave was ripped wide open, and these Godzilla hands went in, grabbed you, and pulled you out. Most of us got shoved down the tunnel to the point where we thought it was going to crush us or stop us breathing, and then eventually, bam, we were expelled out into blinding light, where these giants wearing green or blue were standing around, one of whom immediately cut the link between us and this cave of eternal security. What was the first noise you made? Wow, you were really quiet babies. What was the first noise you made? Yeah, it's no wonder that we cried. Now, hopefully we were then placed into the loving arms of a parent. But we've never ever felt as secure again since as we were before we were born. John would say that if you could give like a release form to a baby just before it was born and said, you can stay here with all this security and warmth, and you won't have any concept of time or anxiety. Or you can go down a tunnel that's going to feel like you're suffocating, and on the other side, nothing will be certain again. Yes or no? I think, you'd probably want to take some advice from an attorney about, I don't know if I want to go down this tunnel. Life is fucking hard. Life is hell. Sometimes the story that we're inhabiting is hell. Each of us has had torments that if you could really sit down with each other and tell each other the totality of your torment, the only appropriate response from your listener would be silence or weeping. This is true of all of us. All of us also have some moment of heroic courage in our past that we're usually not that aware of. Only the person we helped is aware of it. We get to choose right now, not just tomorrow, right now. You want to choose the uncertain path of everyday heroism, because to me, just allowing yourself to get up in the morning and live in the world is a courageous act. If we add that kind of courage to the creativity of discerning a more truthful and a more helpful story, if we draw on the wisest traditions of spirituality, the most sound traditions of psychology, and sound doesn't mean it's not experimental, there's some amazing experimental things happening as well, and things that have served human beings for thousands of years, mostly slowing down our breathing and gathering in small circles committed to the common good. I honestly think we learn the path, not of not feeling fear anymore, but of how to transform fear so that we don't live under its thumb as much as we used to. We might become the kind of people that we already are on the inside. And that honestly, it's not just for your sake that I want this to be true for you. It's for mine as well, because I need other people to get with the program. And you need me to get with the program too. Not turning into kind of, poetic versions of the Terminator, who are now invulnerable, but people who are living as geniuses. Geniuses in the sense that Thelonious Monk meant when he said, a genius is a person who is most like themselves. I'll stop there. Thank you. thank you for listening. And then we've time for some conversation and some questions, and I'm totally aware that like it's amazing that people come and sit for 45 minutes and listen to someone else talk. So thank you for your stamina in doing that. I would love to hear a thought or a question. We can forego the customary awkward silence if you want, or we can have the awkward silence. You know, it's really up to you. I'll take a sip, and when I finish the sip, someone will put their hand up. Oh, good.
So I wanted to explore the flip side or the converse side of fear. So obviously a relief from the anxieties that plague us, whether our lives be short, war, disease, losing loved ones, disability, etc. But then there is also a market for like sheer terror, and there are so many people who love like horror films, or the experience of being terrified, or like now that I've taken the word, recently you may have heard there was like this film that was out and garnering a lot of notoriety about its effect on making people vomit or summon ambulances, etc. And you just wonder that on one level people are complaining that there is so much negativity and so much fear, but then there's also the desire to experience that terror. So I think how I see fear or not wanting to be afraid is I don't want the large questions weighing on me that could take away from the joy and pleasure of my life. But the human experience of witnessing terror for the pleasure aspect of it is actually quite exciting.
Well, and it's also the it's picking up, yeah. It's an evolution. Watching horror movies is an evolution of when people in the Colosseum used to watch actual humans being torn apart by lions. In the same way that some sports are evolutions of battles. So we watch horror movies for the same reason that people like to watch people being killed by gladiators. And it's a lot better to watch a fictional version of it than it is to watch real gladiators actually killing each other. It seems to me it's a little bit like how some vaccines work, that they give you a little bit of the virus in order to help your body avoid getting the whole thing or being overwhelmed by the whole thing. That some of us are so tentative about the world, it might be useful to be invited into a conscious, consensual relationship with some frightening fictional tales that are told well. One of my favorite movies is The Exorcist, which is not really a scary movie anymore because it's old style special effects kind of blunt that, especially when you show it to younger people. But it's a film about confronting something horrifying, which is that an innocent child could be possessed by the devil, which is, I think that's a theme worth thinking about if we think about innocence as metaphorical. An innocent nation, or a nation that believes it's innocent, could be possessed by the devil. And there's a moment in that film, again, for many people, one of the most frightening films ever made, where the young priest asks the old, wise, experienced priest, while they're taking a little intermission from their exorcism, because apparently you can interrupt an exorcism and take a break. I guess they must be union exorcists. So the young priest says, I just don't understand how such a thing could be allowed to happen. Why would an innocent child be possessed by the devil? And the old priest says something like, I think the point is to make us despair, because we adults know that we are not innocent. If one so innocent as this child could be possessed by the devil, how much worse do we deserve who know that we are not innocent? I think it's a very profound thought. I think we are actually innocent in a physical sense. But it's an example. You have to go through this ordeal with that film in order to get to that point, and then something happens afterwards, which I think is one of the most profound things I've ever seen in fiction, where someone does, like, again, fending off the possibility of a courageous self-sacrifice of your own life is not the point. Now, going looking for opportunities to courageously self-sacrifice your life, that's not the point either. Very, very few of us are going to have to courageously self-sacrifice. But if the time comes, I'd like to have enjoyed my life up to that point, and I think I came to realize a while back a judicious engagement with horror fiction probably does me some good, because I think I used to be a lot more afraid of things that weren't real, because I was afraid to watch horror movies. Now I don't watch a lot of horror movies. You got to really convince me to go to see it. And as for the one, the one that got notoriety for people vomiting and calling ambulances and stuff, to me that's just like going to a theme park and being on a roller coaster. It's just people that like to do that. When Brian, my husband, and I, when we go to Dollywood, he goes on a roller coaster and I'm allowed to have a pizza. So, to my mind, we're both doing something risky at that point. So. All right, another question or another comment? Anybody? It's really cool if there's not. You can't ask a question and then both of you get up and leave.
He's not leaving. I'm leaving.
Oh, you're leaving. Okay.
But I'm
okay.
dragging him with me.
You're welcome to leave. It's all right. I think we will happily close it there at any rate. Thank you for coming. I love that briefcase. I used to have one just like that. I will happily sign books for you at the back. I want to let you know that part of what happens when you write a book is you want it to be in conversation with people, and so it means a lot to me that you would be here tonight. If there's anything I've said that's offered shelter, that has come through learning from other people. If there's anything I've said that has threatened to take away some shelter, I invite you to just forget it. And the intention is not to make us more fearful or concerned. It's to try to weave a little bit of shelter through the stories we tell. We take groups of people to Ireland every year to do a deep dive on learning about more of these kinds of things in the inner level, and then also looking at how the society that I'm from is transforming our conflict and some of the things that have been particularly fearful there. Happy to talk with any of you about that as well, but whatever you do the rest of tonight, I appreciate you affirming my work by spending this time together. And I wish you peace and all good things. Thank you.